Great to have so many registrants tonight. It's our pleasure to be hosting tonight's webinar on using NovoNote AI Scribe for the first time. My name is Dr. Ben Buchanan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of NovoPsych, and this is Gina Steinberg, a psychologist and research fellow here at NovoPsych.
As Ben said, I'm Gina. I'm one of the clinical liaisons and psychologists at NovoPsych. And my role at NovoPsych primarily involves working very closely with clinicians as they start using NovoNote. So I help integrate NovoNote into their daily practice in a way that feels practical, safe, and aligned with how they already work. So today really is about that, or tonight, should I say. It's helping you feel confident using NovoNote for the very first time. So we'll walk through how it works and how to actually use it in practice, and what to pay attention to so it supports your workflow. And tonight we'll also include a live demo so you can see exactly how it looks in real time and ask as many questions as you'd like. Now, speaking about questions, feel free to open up the chat below the video, down below, and enter any questions that you might have, and we'll get to them hopefully throughout, but definitely at the end. Awesome. I'll hand over to Ben for a bit more of an introduction.
So a bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist and a technologist and founded NovoPsych all the way back in 2012 with the aim of reducing paperwork for mental health clinicians. At that time, NovoPsych was purely focused on psychometric measurement and assessment. Now we've evolved into being a world leader in psychometrics, but also a leader in the space of an AI Scribe. We're Australia's #1 AI Scribe for mental health clinicians. Apart from NovoPsych, I have worked in private practice. I'm the principal psychologist of Foundation Psychology in Melbourne, and I'm an adjunct research fellow at Monash University and published papers on psychometrics and mental health treatments. I'm also a board-approved supervisor, and so when designing NovoNote, I've really kept in mind clinical governance and good practices for mental health clinicians, and I hope that people that use NovoPsych and NovoNote can see that in the way that we've designed it. So we're going to be talking about NovoNote AI Scribe, and we hope that it's going to make your life easier and your documentation smoother. But I also want to acknowledge that the reason why we all got into mental health care is for the benefit of our patients, to reduce suffering and improve health for the clients that we work with. And my genuine hope is that some of the tools that we're creating will go some way of supporting you in that very important endeavor. I love connecting with people in forums like this. NovoPsych is used by over 75,000 clinicians and 900 practices, but it's webinars like tonight where I can hear from you in the chat. Do ask questions in the chat below and really get a sense of the questions that you're interested in and the concerns that you have. And it's really our pleasure to run these webinars for everyone. I personally think that AI is an absolute revolution and will enhance mental health care dramatically. But there are lots of caveats, risks, and ethical questions that we'll go some way to talking about tonight that I think are also really important. Because with any technology, there can be massive upsides, but we've got to be vigilant of the risks as well. So Gina, I think that you've got a poll for us that people can access in the chat below. I think if people say open chat below, they'll see the poll. And it'd be really interesting for us to learn a little bit about the audience. We've had over about 1,000 registrants tonight, and so it's always interesting to know who we're talking to.
Exactly right, Ben. So if you are able to successfully open the chat and let us know if you're not quite sure, and we'll have someone help you. But we've got a couple of questions live already. We'll wait for everyone to fill them out, and then we'll, I guess, start with a bit of a discussion around them. So the first question is, have you used NovoPsych Psychometrics or NovoNote AI Scribe before? The votes are coming in. A lot of people are kind of new to both of our platforms, which is very exciting. Welcome. A lot of people have used primarily NovoPsych. So they've administered some assessments using our platform. And very few people have tried out our AI Scribe, which means you are definitely in the right place, because that is exactly what we will be running through today. And then our second question is live. So if everyone has a bit of a scroll down, the next question is, if you do use an AI Scribe, how often do you use it? Now, the options for this were every day, weekly, or every so often. So I'd be super interested to see how frequently people are utilizing scribes. And perhaps after today's or tonight's demonstration, that number might change to daily. But let's have a look. So we've got most people choosing every so often, which is interesting, because, once you integrate something into your workflow, it tends to become something, habitual. So hopefully you leave today with an idea of how to integrate the scribe into your daily workflow.
And I know, Gina, you've told me when you're working with clients, you can't live without it now. So people, once they really understand the benefits and those time savings, it can be pretty incredible and something that people don't want to do without. And so we hope to demonstrate that to everyone tonight, so you feel safe and comfortable and confident in integrating this into the work that you do.
Exactly right, Ben. And our third question for today, Pete, if you could release that, or perhaps people could just answer in the chat, is, what are you hoping to get out of tonight's webinar? It might be to learn about what an AI Scribe even is. It might be to understand how NovoPsych and NovoNote work together. It might be to hear about some privacy and security concerns, or it might be just to learn about NovoNote because you've heard about it from colleagues or friends or other people in the industry. Either way, whatever you're here for tonight, we hope to be able to cover any questions you might have, and hopefully you leave feeling a little bit more equipped to use NovoNote AI Scribe in your practice. But let's see what has come up. Awesome. Being able to advocate for it in the workplace, that's awesome. And we do have plenty of people kind of leave these webinars being really inspired to share it with the people that they work with, which is awesome. So we appreciate the advocacy as well. What else? Anything else there to learn about? Just ask NovoNote, which is very exciting. We'll definitely cover that. Awesome. Seems like everyone is here for the right reason. So on that note, we might go ahead and jump straight into the webinar. As said earlier, please feel free to ask questions using the chat box or the link to ask questions, and we'll certainly get to them at some point. Ben, I will now hand over to you.
Great. So I'd like to contextualize the discussion about AI scribes just in terms of the technology adoption that's happened among mental health clinicians over the last decade or so. Back in 2000, the practice management software were being invented and becoming a big thing. And so the likes of Halixy, CorePlus, Xander. And you can see that red line really represents the adoption curve. So I think that probably 90% of certainly private practitioners are using some sort of practice management software. But you can see that adoption happened over the course of 20, 25 years. And then digital assessments, so this is psychometric assessments. They used to be done on paper and pencil, and then somewhere like 2010 maybe, people started adopting them. And again, that adoption curve was pretty slow. But then telehealth, Zoom, that technology adoption curve was much quicker. And there was a catalyst for that, COVID 2020. Even though the technology had been around for a long time with Skype and so on before that, really it took an external catalyst to make that happen. And then with AI, really people started adopting this in mental health practices. At the very end, in sort of 2024 was the very start of it. And then 2025 was the first big year of adoption, and 2026 is huge adoption as well. I'm not sure exactly what proportion of mental health clinicians are using AI Scribe at the moment, but I would be guessing that it would be getting close to half. Um, and I think it's interesting just to reflect as well for therapists. I'm a psychologist, and so a stereotype for a psychologist is with a clipboard and a pen in hand. And in fact, when I Google psychologist, 9 out of 10 images have them with a clipboard in hand. And this is because a piece of paper and a pen has become the primary technology. It is a technology, just a very rudimentary one, that we've used to aid our memory, to take notes so that we can do a better job at serving our clients. It's my hope that this stereotype of a notepad and pen will diminish as clients start to realize that their therapist, their clinician can give them full eye contact, be totally 100% engaged, and let NovoNote AI Scribe do the documentation on the periphery. And AI can do much more than take notes. We'll talk about that mostly, but it's got some other awesome implications, such as AI as an assistant, which Gina will talk about.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI being an assistant. Now, it's important to remember that this isn't really the first time that we've navigated big shifts in the way that we practice. You know, psychology has always adapted to new tools, sometimes clumsily and sometimes gracefully, but always with the same goal in mind, and that's to better support the people that we work with. So I wanted to use this slide to take a moment and have a look about how we got here. And when I sit with clinicians, whether they're early career or seasoned veterans, what I hear most is this kind of tension between tradition and change, between what we know and kind of what we're a bit afraid of, or what the unknown. And I think psychology as a field has always evolved alongside its tools. And so I wanted to take you through a few key moments in our journey to get here. Now, at the turn of the 20th century, projective tests like the Rorschach inkblot test were cutting edge. People debated whether you could actually measure someone's unconscious with a blot of ink. That felt super radical at the time. And then we get to the 50s, and that was the rise of behavioral psychology. We started using stopwatches and strict behavioral coding. Suddenly, therapy was observable actions and not just insight. And that at the time caused a stir too. And then we fast forwarded to the 80s, and CBT comes in, and people say, wait, you want me to hand my client a worksheet? It felt far too overly structured to some, even robotic. And then more recently with Medicare, we saw outcome measures like the DAS-21 and the K10 become standard, which you can access on NovoPsych. And that came with resistance as well. You know, this doesn't just capture the whole person, it's just numbers. So does this sound familiar to you? You know, today's conversation about AI is actually part of a much longer story. And I think it's a story of a field that has always kind of danced between, you know, what's scientific and what's human, between structure and empathy, and between evidence and kind of, you know, being creative. So if you're sitting here thinking, you know, I'm not sure where I land on this AI stuff, you're certainly not alone. It makes sense to both feel cautious and curious. You know, two things can exist at once. And it means that you're being thoughtful about it. And it means that you care about the work that you're providing and the work that you're doing with your clients. Now, I think the key is that every one of these tools that I've mentioned, the stopwatch, the outcome measure, the CBT worksheet, they didn't replace us. They expanded what was possible. Now, what AI is offering us now is not a substitute for therapy. It's another evolution in how we support therapy. So I invite you to think of AI not as something, you know, being pushed on our profession, but as part of almost a natural progression, a progression that you as thoughtful, values-driven clinicians get to shape. So I think this brings us to today's moment where AI scribes are entering the picture. And just like any tool, they're only useful if we understand what they do well and where human strength still reigns supreme. So that's what we're going to talk a bit about today. And I think, you know, what does it mean to treat your AI like an assistant? So I think this is really central to how we think about AI in our profession. When we talk about AI and mental health, it's easy for the conversation to swing towards extremes. And I think that the truth sits, to be honest, more squarely in the middle. AI is best thought of as an augmentation, and a way to extend what we do well. It's not outsourcing our clinical judgment or our relationships with our clients. It's simply about giving ourselves better tools so that we can do our jobs more thoroughly, consistently, and sustainably. And I think one way to think about this is that AI can deliver consistency at scale. It doesn't get tired, doesn't forget details. Of course, there's different levels of bias to AI, which we'll discuss. But it can also flag things that we've missed and highlight patterns and handle the repetitive aspects of our work that can lead to fatigue or error. And I'm sure we all kind of resonate with that level of burnout from documentation requirements. But, and this is crucial, it can't replace our human capabilities. Empathy, nuance, moral reasoning, the therapeutic relationship, our ability to fully understand the context of a client, their life, their values, their culture, their story. And at NovoPsych, and especially with NovoNote, that's the philosophy underpinning what we're building. We're aiming to enhance clinicians' capacity by removing barriers like documentation burden so that your expertise and your voice and your care can really shine through. So that brings us to NovoNote AI Scribe, which is exactly why you're sitting here listening to us talk tonight. So NovoNote is a purpose-built AI scribe designed specifically for mental health clinicians. So it wasn't adapted from another industry. It was shaped by clinicians for clinicians with a strong focus on psychological tone, nuance, and utility. Now, because our team includes clinical psychologists and supervisors, every element of NovoNote is grounded in an understanding of the actual day-to-day demands of our work, not just the admin side, but also the clinical voice, the ethical considerations, and the complexity of human behavior. So that's why NovoNote sounds like us. It writes in a human, thoughtful, psychology-specific tone, not like a tech assistant or a medical bot. So I guess you'll be able to decide for yourself, but a couple of things that I wanted to mention, what sets us apart. Our custom templates, we have a library of different mental health focused templates that you can customize. We have psychometric integration, which is an industry first. If you're already using NovoPsych or if you're yet to discover it, but NovoNote lets you pull in data from NovoPsych into commentary, notes, reports, assessments, etc. This is super unique in the AI space. Letters and reports, you're not just stuck with just session notes. NovoNote can generate full letters and reports that are customizable, and you can restructure them to your liking. Data security and privacy, all data is stored securely for our Australian users in Australia. Importantly, the AI model does not learn from client data, and we'll talk about all of this in a bit more detail later on. And our newest feature, which is just Ask NovoNote, which is your secure assistant. Now, NovoNote is built to support your workflow, your ethics, and your clinical reasoning, not to override it. So let's talk about how NovoNote approaches privacy and security. So some of this is, there's lots of words in this, so I'll try and kind of flesh it out as best as I can, but of course there might be follow-up questions, which is totally fine. So first off, all the data is encrypted, both in transit and at rest, using industry standard encryption protocols. That means that your session data is completely protected, both when it's being processed and when it's being stored. All data for Australians is stored in Australia on enterprise-grade infrastructure. Now, this is really important for compliance with Australian privacy laws and for clinicians working within local regulatory frameworks. Now, one of the biggest questions that we get asked is my client data being used to train the AI model? And the answer is no. Your data is not being used by NovoNote or any third-party model for training purposes. It's closed source AI. In fact, identifiable information is removed before any processing occurs. Another key point on this that we often get asked is, are the audio recordings stored? Again, the answer is no. So audio recordings or storage of you and your client's voice are not stored anywhere. Audio is only used to generate a transcript, and then it's discarded. If this feels a little bit mumble jumble, don't worry. I'm going to go through it a visual so that you can see what I'm talking about. But when a note is retained, it's just the clinical note, not the raw recording. Even if you'd like to access you and your client's voice, you cannot. There are also role-based access controls, meaning that within a practice, clinicians can only access the information that they need, supporting confidentiality within a team. In terms of compliance, NovoNote aligns with APRA standards and Australian privacy principles, HIPAA and GDPR compliance. So it meets both local and international benchmarks for handling sensitive health data, which is very exciting. We really do love the support from our global users. And underpinning all of this is the fact that NovoNote is built by NovoPsych, which is a platform that has been used by clinicians for over a decade with a strong track record in handling sensitive clinical data securely. So the goal here is really to give you confidence that this isn't just a powerful tool, it's one that has been designed to meet the ethical and legal standards of clinical practice. So whilst we're talking about compliance, we do need to mention consent. Now, NovoNote prioritizes consent and the consent process, and we even have a downloadable consent form and fact sheet, which is definitely appreciated by a lot of clinicians to just help with the nuancing around the wording of how to obtain consent from your clients. How you obtain consent to use the Scribe is up to you as a clinician, but we do have a consent form that you might choose to edit and embed in your new patient form, or you might send out to existing patients, as well as a fact sheet that kind of documents some of the points that I've just mentioned. And you can workshop this with your clinic to make sure that everyone is being looked after and everyone is giving informed consent when using the Scribe. Awesome. So I've done a lot of talking about NovoNote, but it's probably time I let it speak for itself. So let's walk through how NovoNote actually works. I'm going to, that was pretty seamless, Pete. That was all good. Awesome. Hopefully everyone can see NovoNote on my screen. Now, NovoNote is an extension of NovoPsych, which is awesome. We'll talk about kind of plans later on, but NovoPsych is our assessments platform. And then within that, you also get access to NovoNote. Now, as mentioned, it's the AI Scribe part of the business, and it's designed by mental health clinicians to write like a mental health clinician. And I'm going to walk it through so that you leave here feeling confident to use it. Now, if you have already made an account or you are already a NovoPsych user, you might choose to follow along with me just so you can wrap your head around where each button sits. But if not, don't worry, we'll be sending out the recording so you can listen to my voice again if you'd like to later or tomorrow. Awesome. So this is NovoNote, and there's very few buttons to be worried about, but we're going to go through them all. So the first place I'm going to start is with my clients list. I'm going to head to my clients up top here, and what you'll notice that if you are a NovoPsych user, all of your clients will have copied across, which is great because you don't need to re-enter them into the system. However, if you're new to our platform or you'd like to add someone for the first time, you can click Add Client and add someone with very basic demographic information. So it makes it super easy to, quite efficiently add your clients into the system. Once your client has been added, you can head back to the homepage and we are ready to record a session. Now I'm going to zoom in over here. You've got 3 ways to get a note into the system. The first way is uploading an audio. Now, this is when you might have an MP3 file already stored on your device. For example, you might have gone for a walk with a client and recorded the session, or you might have recorded a Zoom session, of course, with client consent, and you might choose to upload this MP3 file. I will preface this by saying that any client name that you see throughout this presentation is a fictitious client that has been made for the purposes of this demonstration. So you might choose to upload this MP3 file. What NovoNote will then do is it will strip the audio of the transcript, so the conversation between you and the client, and it will then generate an AI note based on this session. This will make more sense once I demonstrate it. The next way to get a note into the system is via dictation. Now, dictation is when the client has left the room. So this is when you as the clinician get to speak about the session at whatever pace you'd like. It doesn't have to be super organized or coherent. That's what NovoNote does great. It essentially takes what you say and it puts it into a lovely formatted therapy note. I'm going to demonstrate dictate for you in 1 second. But the third way of getting a note into the system, which is our primary use of the tool, is record session. Now, this is great for when the client is obviously sitting in the room with you. So this is how your workflow might look. Let's say you've already obtained consent from Sarah, and Sarah is now sitting in the reception. You would simply press record session. You will then be prompted to search for a client. So I'm going to search for Sarah. And then what you'll notice is NovoNote will make sure that your microphone is working prior to starting the session. We now have telehealth mode, which is very exciting. So if you are someone that does telehealth sessions, this system will work absolutely perfectly for you. You simply connect in your telehealth browser's audio with NovoNote and you can run your session as normal. But let's say Sarah's in the waiting room. I would simply press microphone and I'll then get prompted to choose a template. Now, we're going to talk about templates at length in a second, but a template is essentially the style in which the note is written. Now, I'm going to demonstrate for you how dictation works because obviously I don't have the luxury of having a client with me unless Pete wanted to have a mock therapy session, which I don't think he does at the moment. So I'm going to select dictate and I'm going to search for my client Leo. Now, Leo is a student and I'm going to choose the school's case conference template. Now, this is because I'm about to talk about a meeting that I've had with Leo's teacher and parent. And so I've used the appropriate template that will map on to the meeting that I'm about to have. So this is what my screen looks like. And I might say something like, this was a meeting conducted for client Leo to discuss behavioral concerns at school. People present in the meeting were his teacher, Miss Smith, and his mum, Talia. Discuss Leo's behavior in class being disruptive to other students, but also struggling to regulate his emotions when tasked with something challenging. Discussed how this is apparent at home as well, where Leo struggles to engage in conversations with siblings as well as parents and becomes very distressed when talking about school. Discuss what work I will do as the therapist in sessions going forward, including some emotion regulation strategies and some mindfulness tasks. We will have another case conference meeting in 2 months to discuss Leo's progress. So once I press end session, NovoNote will take about 30 seconds to process the recording. And it will then take what I've said and allocate it to the template that I've chosen. So we'll give that a second and we'll see how it's decided to organize my note. What you'll notice is that NovoNote has now mapped on what I've said to different headings. Now, you might be wondering, where does it get these headings from? And we're going to show you the back end of it, which is very exciting. It has decided, it's used its, intuition to decide what I've said and where it should go. So let's use a full example to highlight this because I think this is great. Dictation's great, but I'd like to show you what a full session note looks like. So I'm going to head to my client, Claire. Now, what you'll notice in Claire's profile is 6 appointments that I've had with her, 6 sessions, as well as her GP letter. I'm going to use session 3 as an example. Now, this was a 55-minute session that I've had with Claire, and I used the comprehensive psychology note template, which is the default template in our system. As you can see, I've got very specific subheadings that the note has been mapped onto. Now, the first thing that you're able to do when the note has been produced is make as many changes as you'd like. Consider it like a Word document. You can add things in, you can take things out. It's really, yours to kind of customize. We do obviously encourage clinicians to have a full read of the note that's produced and make as many changes as they'd like. The next thing that you're able to do from this note is read the transcript. So you can read the back and forth between you and the client, which is really valuable in case you might have missed something or you'd like to clarify something. We'll talk about the transcript and how long it is kept for shortly. The next thing that you'll notice is this little plus button. What my favorite feature is of the note being produced is that you're able to create duplicate versions of the note in a different style. For example, I like to create a client session summary at the end of every session so that I have a copy to give to my client. And all that NovoNote's doing right now is it's using the exact same session that I've just had with Claire, but it's going to now turn it into a client-friendly version so that I can send it to her. This is really great for, I guess, client accountability, but also to, summarize what was discussed for the client, because I'm sure, some sessions are quite thorough and it's a great way to remind the client of what you've spoken about. Now, you can create as many versions of the note as you'd like, but once you're happy with it, you might be content with using just the comprehensive psychology note template. A couple of other buttons on my screen right now is, if you're totally happy with it, you might be ready to put it elsewhere. So you might choose to copy it by simply pressing on the copy button or downloading it as a PDF or Word document to store it elsewhere or to send it to a client, whatever the case may be. Now, you might be noticing this little blue magical box called Just Ask NovoNote, and that's something that I'd like to touch on now. Now, Just Ask NovoNote is your secure assistant that's built in to NovoNote, and you get to access it from 3 different places. The first place is where we are right now, which is within a specific session note. So when I click on Just Ask NovoNote, you'll see a bunch of suggestions that you might be able to ask it. I'm going to ask it to, I guess, let's see, reflective practice, critique my session. I'd like to know how I did as a therapist for my session with Claire. Let's see what it asks me. I have a feeling it's going to ask what, yeah, exactly. Would I like it to be affirming, balanced, or critical? I'm going to ask it to be critical. Let's see how I did. I'll make this a little bit bigger so that you're able to see properly. Awesome. So as you can see, Just Ask NovoNote, or Jan, is able to provide a critical reflection on me as a clinician. It's given me some clear areas to improve on, but it's also started with some strengths, which is reassuring. And I find this really useful as a tool to understand how I'm doing as a clinician, because often, you can go weeks without really knowing exactly, what your strengths are, what you could work on. And I find this invaluable to just, critically reflect on how I'm doing per client. Another thing I might ask Jan for this client is, which NovoPsych assessments might be helpful. Now, whilst this is an example prompt in that little light bulb, you can ask it whatever you'd like, but I find this question also really great and gives me a bit of direction. Awesome. So it said that based on Claire's presentation, I might consider the attachment style questionnaire and the brief early schema questionnaire, as well as the adverse childhood experiences questionnaire. And that's awesome. Now, so I don't forget this, I might choose to add this to Claire's profile or create a new note with this, and I can always come back to it. Awesome. So that's accessing Jan or Just Ask NovoNote from a specific session. But let's talk about accessing it from Claire's profile. So I'm going to head back to Claire's profile. And now, as you can see, we're back where all the 6 sessions are. When I click on Just Ask NovoNote from here, the difference this time is that Jan has access to all my information or all my notes with Claire, which means it has a far more, thorough database of notes to work with. From here, I might ask Jan to create a mermaid flowchart formulation for this client from a CBT lens. Let's see how it goes with this. What I'm really hoping to understand is all the moving parts that we've spoken about across various sessions. How do they come together? What formulation can I make for this client now that we're at the 6 session mark? Let's have a look with what Jan comes up with. Awesome. So we now have this very beautifully, I love the pastel colors of our flowchart. And as you can see, what a nice visual to be able to conceptualize this client's presentation. Awesome. We've got our CBT interventions and some of our outcomes. And then, of course, just for further clarity, it's got a summary of the key CBT elements. Now, this is great. I might choose to download this as a PDF. Maybe I want to attach this to the client's file, or you can create a new note with it. We also encourage you, if you're going to start using Jan, to give some thumbs up or thumbs down if you're happy with the content or you think it needs to be workshopped more, simply so that we have a bit of a baseline to know what clinicians like you are hoping to learn or use Jan for. Awesome. I hope I haven't lost everyone yet. We're up to the 3rd place that you can utilize Jan. Now I'm going to head back to the home page. Now, using Jan up the top here from the home page it's a much more generic use of the tool. For example, you might, how to use NovoNote. That's a question you might ask, or explore the assessment library. Or you might say, explain the ethical issues with working with a sibling of an existing client. Something like that. Let's see how it goes, providing some more, generic advice or not pertaining to a specific client or client's files. Awesome. So it's gone and given me some primary concerns around this and also the professional standards that I should adhere to. And this, what I've highlighted with Jan is just, the tip of the iceberg. It's very versatile and it can really support your clinical work in many, many ways. Awesome. So let's head to my name in the top right corner and talk about templates for a second. Now, because we are an AI Scribe for mental health clinicians, we have a wide library to choose from of different mental health focused templates. I'm talking ones for every modality like schema, EMDR, play therapy, IFS, couples therapy. But then we also, have many assessment based templates like ADHD clinical interview, the MIGDAS, DIVA, ADOS, you name it, we've got a template for it. You might choose to just use the meeting summary one, or risk assessment, safety plan, etc. Now, the great thing about our templates is that you can click into them and see exactly how they're programmed. And you can make as many changes as you'd like. For example, I might choose to look into the cognitive behavioral therapy template. From here, I'm able to see the exact subheadings that I will get when using this template. You can make as many changes to this depending on how you'd like to run a CBT focus session. So from here, you can see clearly that the template is going to prompt NovoNote to create a CBT formulation. Now, this template is one of my favorites because I really do love how it writes out the formulation for me. Now, if you tend to start every session with a "how was your week?" and you like that to be a subheading of your note, you might simply add in a subheading, "How was your week?" You might then choose to say, "Document client's response to this question." And just like that, I have been able to customize the CBT template. So, it might feel a bit stressful or confusing on how to make the changes, but something as simple as that will now prompt the template next time you use it to put a subheading that will make your note more personalized. And you can simply save this as a new version in the bottom right and always come back to it if you'd like to make changes going forward. My recommendation is to look down our list of templates and simply put a star next to the ones that you might be comfortable using or that you might want to explore. And then once you get more advanced with the platform, you might consider building your own template from scratch. And we have a guide on how this might be possible. So templates, there's so many to choose from, and I do encourage you to have a look at the list. Awesome. Whilst we're in our settings on the left here, I'm going to head to data retention. Now, I did mention before that what NovoNote will produce for you is a note, but what's behind the note is the transcript. Now, the transcript can be kept for as long as you would like as the clinician. You can choose to have this kept on our system for good, or you can have it automatically delete from our platform after 1 hour post session. This is totally up to you, and how you make this decision again is totally up to you as the clinician. Mine is set to never delete for the sake of these demonstrations, but it's totally your prerogative as a clinician how long you do keep that transcription for. I will be clear that the note is one part and then the transcript is something else. So you can keep the note whilst deleting the transcript. The transcript is just that full back and forth conversation that is behind the therapy note. Awesome. So let's go back to the homepage, and we're now going to talk about creating a document. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of the platform because this is really where you can synthesize information and put together sources from multiple places. So I'm going to select create document, and I'm going to search for my client Claire again. Claire's getting a workout tonight. Now, it's going to suggest which templates to use, and for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to choose discharge summary. What you'll notice on the left here is I now can select X amount of therapy sessions to include in this letter. So I'm going to select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to select session transcripts as well, just to have more data to include in this letter. What you'll notice next is I can include psychometric results that are, stored in NovoPsych. So this is a fantastic way to integrate both qualitative and quantitative results from our platforms into a holistic letter. Now you can see that Claire has completed a wide range of assessments. I'm going to include her DAS results, her PHQ-9 results, and her difficulties in emotion regulation scale results. The next thing that NovoNote allows you to do is add files that are not sitting in the platform, which is fantastic because, as you can see here, Claire has a university special consideration letter, she has a psychiatrist report, and a mental health care plan that I would like to include as collateral in writing this letter. Now, all that NovoNote will do is it will simply consult these resources to make sure that the note is accurate. And it's going to use this as collateral, which is super helpful. You then might choose to put some additional context in here. Claire needs to be referred to a body dysmorphic specialist. And then you can choose how detailed you would like this note to be. And just like that, you're able to combine multiple sources of information plus psychometrics and your session notes into one consolidated, eloquently written discharge summary. And you can see the way that NovoNote writes, it really is client-centered and neuroaffirming, and it does an amazing job at finding, the best way to write succinctly, which is awesome. So we'll give that a second to finish typing. As you can see, it's able to summarize the psychometric assessments. And when that note is finished, you can simply, just like before, press copy or download, and that's ready to go to the respective doctor. Now, I know that was a lot of information to take in, but that I guess I would describe as my highlight reel of NovoNote, and it's fantastic. And I hope that was, just a bit of insight into what's possible, and I hope you can imagine just how it might be able to support your workflow, and then in turn have an impact on you being more present in the therapy room and focusing on what really matters. So I've done a lot of yapping. I'm going to now hand back over to Ben.
Excellent work, Gina. Well done. I mean, NovoNote is fantastic, and I think the key thing is, gosh, it saves people a lot of time. I know that when people first learn about NovoNote and see it, it's like, oh my gosh, all of these features. The key thing is, it's probably going to save you like an hour a day, which is incredible. So I want to talk a little bit, before we get to questions, I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that has been published about the use of AI scribes and AI in general in mental health care and healthcare generally. This particular study I really like, and it's actually a study on GPs using an AI scribe. And what they did, they got the AI scribe to to listen into consultations with a GP, and then very experienced doctors rated how the quality of that note on a number of different parameters, including how accurate that note was, how thorough, useful, organized, comprehensive, succinct, synthesized, internally consistent, free from hallucinations. Hallucinations is a term used in AI for inaccuracies. Really should be called confabulations, but it's called hallucinations, and free from bias. And you can see on the right there the average rating that the AI note received. And so you can see that it did a really great job. It was accurate, free from bias, free from hallucinations. It just did really well. Wasn't that, didn't score particularly high on usefulness or thoroughness. The higher the score, the further it is to the outside, 60 being the maximum. But you can see that generally, these expert doctors were rating these AI-generated notes as pretty good. And so the question that I've got for you is, how good are human notes? What do you think? Well, here are the results. They compared it to what the doctors were actually writing, and they discovered that the doctors writing notes were worse on every single parameter except for usefulness, which they were equal. And so this is a great example of how incredible notes are. And I know that this is just a study, right? And usually when people actually use NovoNote for like 2 clients, this is sort of self-evident, and you just see, oh my gosh, this does notes way better than I ever did. And you'll see that when you use it with the first client. I also want to highlight another study on using AI to write assessment reports. This study was published last year, which in AI terms is like, you know, um, a century ago. And what they did was they got 249 psychologists who evaluated psychological reports written by either an AI or another psychologist. Both human and AI were given the same mock child assessment data, such as written histories, psychometrics data, such as ADHD scales, the WISC, and so on, and interview findings. And then the AI was used, which was an early 2023 model. So this is actually quite an old technology. The technology that NovoNote uses is much newer than this now. Um, and so they were comparing a 2023 version of AI with psychologists who had an average of 18 and a half years of postdoctorate experience. And the psychologists and the AI were given the same prompt. They were asked to write a comprehensive psychological assessment report, including DSM-5 diagnoses and recommendations using the following data. And then the assessment reports that were written were blindly rated by psychologists. So the psychologists didn't know which ones were written by other psychologists and which ones were written by AIs. And they were rated on overall quality, readability, writing style, organization, and so on. So, I've showed you the last study. I wonder what this study is going to find. So, firstly, I think the thing that I really want to highlight is just the time taken. AI was able to write these reports in 91 seconds, whereas the human took 2.5 hours. If you think about your practice, how long do you spend a day doing, doing writing reports, writing letters, writing notes? It's a long time, and AI is just so staggeringly fast. And the average length of these reports that in this study they were writing was the psychologist was writing 5 pages, the AI about 4 pages. And then the rating psychologists of their preference. So the good news for us humans is that psychologists preferred the report written by the human 49% of the time, whereas they preferred the AI one 36% of the time. But the report written by the AI had a better recommendation sections. And when these independent psychologists blindly rating these reports said, would you sign off on a report like this? They said that they would 49% of the time for the ones written by the human and 43% of the time written by the AI. So what is this showing? Well, it's showing that psychologists slightly preferred reports written by other psychologists. But this goes for, this particular study I'm focusing on is for psychologists. This will go for psychiatrists, GPs, social workers, counselors. It's just this particular study was focusing on psychologists. And I think that the conclusion of this study is really that AI does a fantastic job, but that when a human augments their skills with AI, we can get really great results. Note that these were just putting AI and a human head to head. What this study didn't evaluate was when you get a human and AI and put them together. And that is what NovoNote is, and that's how I would definitely encourage you to use it. Don't just outsource everything to the AI, even though it'll only take you 91 seconds to write a report. Spend a bit of time on it, make it better, and you can have better quality reports for a shorter amount of time. And what we see when clinicians are using this is that we just get an incredible feedback here. Andrea Bear says, NovoNote speeds up my ADHD and autism assessments. With NovoNote, I spend much less time on report write-up, and it's extremely thorough. This means that people like psychologists like Andrea can spend more time engaging with the client, tuning into the client, thinking deeply, rather than typing on a keyboard. But there's some caveats with this. AI is incredibly powerful, but this is a funny meme that I made up because I think that it demonstrates one of the pitfalls. We've got a psychologist on the left saying, hey, AI, turn this single point into a long letter for the referring GP that I can pretend I wrote. And of course, AI can dutifully write some big, long report and letter or whatever. And then this poor GP saying, oh my gosh, AI, turn this long letter from the psychologist into a single point. And so what we don't want to do, and I'd caution you against this, is just writing huge amounts of documentation for the sake of it. We've still got to keep an eye that quality documentation is sometimes still succinct documentation. And we can't lose sight of that, even though AI just makes it so easy to produce huge amounts of documentation. So I hope that we've inspired you to use NovoNote. We've built this for psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, counselors, psychotherapists, and anyone working in the mental health sphere. And the good news is that you can get started with NovoNote if you've got a NovoPsych account already, but you've just used it for psychometrics. You can get started today. It's included. The little NovoNote button on the top of your account. If you go to NovoPsych.com and press login and then go into NovoNote. If you don't have an account yet, you can also you can sign up for one. Gina, if you can just go back a slide, just a word on pricing. NovoNote is, you can get into starting to use NovoNote for $30 a month. And this gives you 50 pro actions. This means 50 notes, reports, documents a month. Most users will find that sufficient, but if you're working full time or you've got a big caseload, you might want to go up to a Pro Plus or Platinum plan. Platinum gives you unlimited everything. But certainly the place I'd recommend that you start is on the $30 plan, and then you see how you like it, you see how much you're using it each month. I think at the start we asked a poll how many people had used NovoPsych, and many of you had just used the NovoPsych assessments platform. If that's the case, I'd encourage you to get started with NovoNote. If you haven't got an account yet, I'd encourage you to, Gina, if you can go to the next slide, go to NovoPsych.com and sign up for a 15-day free trial and give it a go. I truly believe that if you use NovoNote with 1 or 2 clients, you will see the value so immediately. And even though Gina did a great job demoing it, the proof is really in the pudding. Once you use it with a client, you ask the client, hey, is it okay if I use an AI to help me write notes? 99% of clients will say, yep, that's fine. And then you put it on, you have your laptop in the corner of the room, listening, and then you just conduct a session like you usually would, but you put down your pen and you just tune into the client. And at the end, you'll see the best note that you've ever written, except you didn't write it. So, time for some questions. We've got 7 minutes for questions. Gina, what are some of the questions that have come up?
Yeah, well, Pete's done a great job at answering some of the chat, so we might do like a power round, Ben, of questions that Pete has passed over to us. So the first question is, what modalities or therapeutic approaches is Jan trained in? So yeah, how does it know the key play therapy themes, for example, and their meanings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can choose, so play therapy is a great example. We actually have a play therapy template in NovoNote. And if Jan detects that you've been doing play therapy, and especially if you've done this, and if you've picked the play therapy note template, Jan will take the lead and give you feedback and consider that note in light of whatever modality you've done. The truth is that Jan has read every psychology textbook in existence, and we've tuned it to be particularly to be evidence-based and to be guided by the therapeutic modality of the clinician. There is a spot in NovoNote where you can actually tell NovoNote what sort of therapeutic modality you work in. and that will color the feedback that you received from Jan.
Awesome. That's a great answer. We have a couple questions around adding other languages and also a mobile phone option, which I presume means an application. So maybe
Yeah.
languages and application.
So NovoNote will work on your mobile phone just fine if you just log in with your web browser on your mobile phone. So it works great on phones, iPads, laptops. Languages. We have this on our roadmap, um, and we'll be making an announcement in the next month or so. First language we're going to be doing is Spanish, followed by Portuguese and French.
Awesome. Next question is regarding a subpoena and transcripts and can you talk to that for a second?
Yeah, great question. Um, so, um, you as the clinician get to decide what you put in your clinical file. My strong recommendation is that you don't put transcripts into your clinical file. The default option within NovoNote is that transcripts will get deleted after 3 months. The reason we've kept them in with that's the default option is because we think that there is value in having transcripts in there for a little bit longer, just so that you can write a discharge letter, for example, and it can be informed by the full context. But if you are worried about things like subpoenas, you can set the default to delete transcripts immediately after a note is created. But I think the key thing is when a note is created, NovoNote does not generate your clinical file. You still get to decide what is within your clinical file. And when you press copy or save, and many people use NovoNote and then copy it into a practice management system or another filing system so that they can say, you know what I'm saving over here is my clinical file. So I think you still get to choose what's in your clinical file, and I would highly recommend that you don't include transcripts.
Awesome. Great answer. Is it useful for a psychiatrist?
Absolutely. We've got heaps of psychiatrists using it, especially for the what's the Medicare item number 491 or something, where you can do a assessment report and feedback to a GP. We've got a great template for that, and psychiatrists are loving it.
Exactly. I'm also the kind of medication review appointment, general review, first session, great templates for psychiatrists. Can NovoNote be used in other countries, specifically Singapore, New Zealand, etc.?
Yes, yes, we've got lots of users across the globe, New Zealand in particular, Singapore, the United States, UK, Ireland. We are compliant with the major legislation in Australia, Europe, and the US. And so yes, you can use it there.
Awesome. And I guess one more question for the last couple of minutes, which I think is a nice one to round out with. But, I have questions around AI with taking notes during session and clients getting distracted or concerned about something listening. So maybe some comments and advice on how to best approach this with clients.
Yeah, so I think that I haven't heard this much actually. I think that most clients are just totally fine with it and get used to it. I think most clients and patients, if they've been to a doctor recently, will sort of probably have been asked, and I think it's getting pretty normalized. Um, and I think certainly by maybe a subsequent session that patients will just be used to it and probably won't think about it anymore. What's your experience, Gina, of how are your clients?
My clients, I haven't had an issue yet at all. I think if anything, clients just maybe ask a few follow-up questions, just wanting to know, oh, like what does it do? How does it work? And so I guess knowing the answers to those kind of questions, and I've even heard of some clinicians showing their clients the note that it produces and
Yeah.
having, a frank conversation about how good is this? Look at the flow chart it's made, look at this. And so I think including your clients is part of informed consent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that thing with being able to show clients the notes is amazing. I always felt embarrassed when a client wanted to see their notes, or I got subpoenaed or something, because I had typos all through my notes. But obviously now with NovoNote, my notes are perfect. So I don't have to have that embarrassment anymore. And I think it's a lovely collaborative thing to say this is just an objective record about how our session went. So
Awesome. And just one final remark, and then I guess we'll round out. There's a couple of other unanswered questions in there, and a lot of them are associated with a help guide on our website. So if you have that burning question and we haven't gotten to it, for example, how to step-by-step activate telehealth, just head to our website. There's a training section, and you can search
for. Bring that up on your screen, Gina? Is that all right? If you go to novopsych.com, and this also goes, if you don't have a NovoPsych account yet, you can go to novopsych.com, and you can you can see on the top there's a sign up button, or an activate free trial button. And if you want any support, you can go to the user guide and frequently asked questions. We'd be more than happy to. There's lots of resources there that are really helpful. So tonight was a bit of a taster about what NovoNote AI Scribe can do today and how people are using AI today in their practice. If you're interested in what NovoNote AI Scribe will be able to do in a month or a year, I encourage you to come along to our next webinar, which I'll be running in a month. And you can access that on novopsych.com as well. And if you go to the top and press professional development, you can register for that. I think that AI is going to revolutionize clinical practice, and I would be very keen to share some of those thoughts about the future roadmap with you on the 6th of May. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure doing these, and thank you for the wonderful questions. And I look forward to hearing how you go with NovoNote, and I hope that it's going to save you hours every week. Take care. Bye.